In this lecture, we are going to cover the ultrafast electron dynamics in the boson transport equation framework, including the high field dynamics. And let me check again, can everyone hear me well? Am I loud enough? Okay. Yeah, so let me start.
Sorry? Can you give us 1 second?
You can slide, slides a bit larger. Yeah, sure. No problem.
Yeah, just let me know when to restart.
So,
Did it change in between?
yeah, I mean, like,
Now the speaker is there on the right, so
okay, yeah, we can maybe switch to like this,
Oh, yeah.
and sounds like that. Good?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Sorry for interruption.
Okay. Yeah, so either everything is fine?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So let me keep going then. Yeah, so with the advances in the HPC technologies and the high performance computing, nowadays it's possible to perform the ab initio, so parameter-free calculations of the non-equilibrium dynamics. And usually when we talk about the non-equilibrium dynamics, especially the electron one, we consider the very established method, which is real-time time-dependent density functional theory, which is presented on your left. So in this method, we time propagate the electronic wave function within the time-dependent quantum equation. So we track here, we time step the electronic wave function, in this case phi, and following the Schrodinger-like equation. Typically, we would do this with the time step of 1 attosecond, and as you can see, well, because of the computational cost, the typical time scales here can vary from attosecond to femtosecond, describing very well the electron-electron interactions. However, in today's lecture, we are interested in more than that. We are interested in electron-phonon interactions, phonon-phonon interactions, etc. So this kind of physics occurs at larger time steps, going to picoseconds or even to nanoseconds. Therefore, going to this large time scales is just unbearable with this method. Therefore, we are going to use the method that you know already very well, which is many-body perturbation theory to compute the scattering processes. So in particular, the real-time boson transport equation, where we compute the time evolution of the electronic occupation function f and k as a function of t, which was very well presented in the previous theory talk by Drew. So our key quantity is f, and our time step now is something about 1 femtosecond. So just to compare, it's just a time step. So the very next stage is equal to the entire simulation time of the RTTD of t. So with this method, so which we call RTBT, we are able to time step the occupation function long enough and account for such physics as electron phonon scattering, phonon phonon scattering, etc. Okay. So let me consider in more details the boson transport equation, the real-time boson transport equation. So it was already presented in the previous lecture. However, now I would like to draw your attention to the fact that our dfdt, the time derivative of the occupation function, is not 0. So we are considering the non-equilibrium case. We are not considering the steady state. So we are actually time stepping this occupation function f. Similarly, we consider that we have a homogeneous material. So we have no R dependence, no dependence on the special variable. And for now, just for now, we will consider no external fields. So then, so since our Boltzmann transport equation is a formulation of the conservation of the number of particles in the phase space, right? So on the right-hand side, we will have different collision processes that can drive our particle from this element of a phase space to another element. So what can that be? Similarly to the previous lecture, it can include electron-phonon interactions, electron-electron interactions, etc. We have the full list of that. But in this lecture, we will restrict ourselves to the electron-phonon interaction. So then we have a partial derivative equation, actually coupled integral differential equation, where we provide the initial condition f of t equal to 0. So concerning the electron distribution function, just as a reminder, so we have two indices n and k, where k is the electron momentum index and n is the electron band index, and now our occupation function is time dependent. On the phonon side, we have the phonon occupation n nu q, where q is the phonon wave vector, mu is the mode index, and in this case, we consider the fixed occupation at the given temperature. So in our group, we have actually some works that are dedicated to changing our phonon occupations, accounting to the phonon-phonon interactions. But in this lecture, we will consider the phonon occupation to be fixed. So finally, we have this kind of equation where we have the time derivative of the occupation function on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, we will have the electron-phonon scattering integral. Then one of the key ingredients in the electron-phonon scattering integral are the so-called electron-phonon matrix elements that you have seen already. But let me briefly remind what is this quantity. So let us just consider an electron in some initial state epsilon and k with this wave vector describing this this state, right? So psi and k. So then we can consider a scattering from one state to another, so to a state with an energy epsilon mk plus q with a different band index in general case, and the wave a different wave function. So in order to conserve the energy and momentum, we should emit a phonon with the phonon frequency omega nu q. So the probability of such scattering will be proportional to the modulus square of these electron phonon elements G. So what are those electron phonon matrix elements? You have seen them already. Just as a quick reminder, on the right-hand side, you have the initial state wave function. On the left-hand side here, in this sandwich, you have the final state wave function. And in between, you have the mode resolved perturbation potential. So we compute this quantity from DFPT and then interpolate them in Perturbo. So now let us consider this electron phonon scattering integral, and let us actually dissect it onto different contributions, and to see that all of these contributions are intuitive. So they can be derived from the many-body perturbation theory, but we can understand them using just the Fermi-Goldman rule. So so if you consider, as in the previous slide, an electron in initial state epsilon and k undergoing a transition to another state emitting a phonon, what will be the probability of such an event? Well, for this event to be able just to occur, we have to have some electrons in the initial state, right? So we have this occupation function, f and k. Then we want our electron to go to that state, which means that this state has to be empty. So I mean, at least it should have some empty states there. So we should multiply by 1 minus f. And then since we are emitting a phonon, and phonons are bosons, so we have to weight this by the factor of n nu q plus 1. So then, if we consider a similar case, but the phonon absorption, of course, similarly, we will have this term where in this case, we will multiply just by n nu q because we absorb a phonon. So then we add the time reversal conjugate, so just the reverse processes as well. So now we have these 4 terms that account for these occupation factors. And in order to compute the scattering integral, we need to multiply the scattering events by the probability of scattering, so by the G modulus square elements that are presented in the previous slide. And we have to fulfill the energy conservation. So we take the here on the delta functions that ensure the energy conservation, we take the initial state, initial energy epsilon k, and we take into account the final energy. So h omega and epsilon mk plus q. So combining all of the terms together, we will have the scattering integral, which is written on the bottom of the slide. So let me just consider this like entirely this time-dependent equation. So we have this time derivative of the occupation function, which is equal to this electron phonon scattering integral. And in this case, since we want to time step this equation, we have to evaluate this time integral at each step. So in previous lectures, so for example, for RTA, you would need to evaluate a similar integral, but only once. For the ITA approach, you needed to do that many times, but maybe not more than 50 times or so. So for example, you remember that bolts and step was equal to 50. So now in this case, we might need to evolve this scattering integral hundreds or even thousands of times, which you will see in the tutorial and hands-on on the ultrafast dynamics. So this poses a huge computational challenge. So numerically, we solve this equation with the first order Euler or fourth order Runge-Kutta methods. And then the solution to this computational challenge, so we have actually 2 of them. So first is we select the energy window. So this approach was presented in the previous lecture by Dhruv. So, so for example, consider silicon. and consider just the conduction bands of silicon. So assume we want to perform the ultrafast dynamics of electrons and silicon. So we start with some initial conditions. We have some electrons on the conduction band edges, and then we excite them somehow with a light or with electric field, etc. So these electrons most probably will not even leave this energy window region, which means that we do not need to describe all of the states, especially we do not describe holes at all. So we can restrict our Brillouin zone only to this energy window, which improves significantly the computational efficiency. And second venue of the optimization is the efficient OpenMP and MPI parallelization. And I'm going to talk about this in detail in the next slide. So here, once again, is our equation where we need to perform the summation over the very dense Hue grid of this summation. And then this integral has to be evaluated for each fixed K point as well. So let me go through all of these simulation steps, paying attention to the parallelization scheme. So we start our simulation with some initial condition. We find, select, and distribute the KQ pairs, which means that we, among all of the possible KQ pairs, we would select just some of them that fulfill our conservation laws. So then we will have this KQ pair ensemble, which will be split over different MPI processes. So here is presented process 1 to up to n. So MPI is a non-shared memory technology where these KQ pairs will be split over different tasks, and then within each task, within each local KQ pair pool, we will perform the OpenMP parallelization. So when we will be computing this, first of all, these electron phonon matrix elements, we will be doing that also using the OpenMP parallelization. So once we evaluated the scattering integral for fixed pool, we will then assemble the results over different MPI tasks to compute the total electron phonon integral. At this stage, since we know already the electron phonon integral, we are able to time step our occupation function. So we are able to move one step further. So we compute our occupation function at t plus delta t. And if the simulation is not finished, we have to repeat. But when we will be repeating, we are not going to recompute these G elements on the fine electron and phonon grid. We will store them in memory, and then we will just read them, which significantly improves the efficiency of the approach. So as you can see, choosing different number of MPI tasks and OpenMP threads, you will be in a different situation, a different, so to speak, topology of how you would split your pools, right? So that's why I would like to talk a bit about these different strategies, how to parallelize over MPI and OpenMP. So here, I take a test case of gallium arsenide in a typical calculation. That's not anyhow the heroic calculation. That's a typical calculation for the ultrafast dynamics. And you can see how many KQ pairs we have to deal with. So our computational setup here is a machine with 4 nodes, 80 cores in total, 20 cores per node. And then it has, each node would have 2 CPUs with 10 cores per CPU. Then I would do the following thing. While keeping my resources constant, so for each different calculation, I would keep still 80 cores busy. But then I will change the trade-off between OpenMP and MPI. So each point here on this curve will be a separate calculation where I will be taking different number of OpenMP threads and MPI processes per node. And so here on the y-axis, I present the time of the one dynamics iteration. So if it's one iteration for this small system, you can imagine the total wall time, like for example, for 1,000 steps or more. And here, so on x-axis here is number of MPI processes, and on top is the number of OpenMP threads. So what you can see is that, like, first observation is that it doesn't change that much, which means that both OpenMP and MPI parallelization of the ultrafast dynamics in Perturbo is efficient. However, you can see some trends. So for example, this point presents a non-efficient calculation. Why? Because since I already mentioned, OpenMP is a shared memory technology. If you try to share your matrices over 2 CPUs that have a slower connection between them, it will be hurting somehow your performance. So maybe the most efficient will be somewhere in between. So in this case, it will be 4 MPI processes per node and 5 OpenMP threads. So this trend is totally machine dependent. It depends on many factors. That's why I wanted just to warn you a little bit and to suggest to run this kind of calculation just once for a new machine. So that might save you a lot of computational time in some cases. And here, for to conclude this non-zero, to conclude the zero-field ultrafast dynamics, I wanted to show a typical simulation setup. So we take a silicon material here. We excite our electrons, so we take only the conduction bands, and we excite them with the Gaussian excitation. So we select the energy of this excitation. We select some broadening. So and then we have this initial electron occupation. So then the phonon temperature is fixed to 300 Kelvin. Our time step of the simulation will be 1 femtosecond, and we will use just the first order error solver, which works in most of the cases. So let's see what's going on. So once we run our simulation, we will have these electron-phonon interactions which will drive the system towards the equilibrium. So we will restore our equilibrium, the Fermi-Dirac distribution, after some amount of steps. Okay, so much for the zero field ultrafast dynamics. So now let us play a bit more and let's include the high field term in the Boltzmann transport equation, and let's enter this high field calculations. So so here again I present the real-time Boltzmann transport equation, right? And we have seen this term, two terms already, and now we are adding this external field term where here the field can take any values. So in the previous lectures, we usually would be assuming small field regimes. So now here the value of the electric field can be anything. So why is it interesting? So one of the applications of such dynamics can be the velocity field curves. In particular, we might be interested in what happens to our system when we apply strong field, and in particular, what will be the steady state or what will be the drift velocity of electrons when we apply such high fields. So a typical curve is presented here. So for the example of a silicon system. So here we would trace our drift velocity, so basically the response of the electronic system to the external field perturbation as a function of electric field. Then usually this drift velocity dependence will be linear for small fields, presenting this small field regime where you can find your mobility, your low field electron mobility. Then for high fields, it would typically saturate. And then having this curve, you can predict the behavior of semiconductor devices under high field regimes. So a conventional method to treat this system would be the semi-empirical Monte Carlo approach that requires many semi-empirical parameters. So just as an example here, I show you a table of parameters that you just need to enter to your calculation to perform this simulation using Monte Carlo. Where would you take these parameters from? You can ask. So you can take them from experiment, you can feed them, you can take them from DFT, from somewhere. So, and you have to have all of them in order to be able to perform this kind of simulation. So now here within RTBT, we want to perform the parameter-free calculation of the electron dynamics at high field. So having zero empirical parameters. So we have implemented this high field term in the Boltzmann transport equation, and that became available from the 2.0 version. So the advection term, similarly to the previous lectures, computed with a finite difference method. More details can be found here in this paper. And in Perturbo, so for example, in the input file, you can specify this electric field as simple as this, just with the different XYZ directions of the electric field in the volt per centimeter units. So now the particularity of the system is that we still have to keep the small time step, relatively small time step, which is about 1 femtosecond, in order to keep this electron phonon scattering physics here in our simulations. However, in order to reach a steady state once the electric field is applied, we have to time step the system long enough. So the simulation times can go up to 10 picoseconds. So So that's why we actually take advantage of this efficient polarization scheme to compute this electron photon scattering integral. So once this approach is implemented in Perturbo, I would like to show you a procedure how you can compute such velocity field curves or other non-equilibrium dynamics using Perturbo. So in these simulations, our goal is to obtain the drift velocity as a function of the electric field. So here we start with the initial condition. We start with the occupation functions at the thermal equilibrium. Then we apply some value of the electric field. In this case, it will be 100 volt per centimeter. Then once we have applied our electric field, we time step the Boltzmann transport equation until a steady state is reached. So here you can see this schematically. We plot here the carrier population as a function of energy, and the color corresponds to the time of the simulation. So we start with the initial condition in blue, and then our electrons evolve and relax towards a new steady state at T1 in pink. So here, during this simulation, we compute the transient carrier velocity as presented here. And at the steady state, we evaluate the drift velocity. So we can see this transient carrier drift velocity on the y-axis as a function of time here. So at some point, we reach a steady state drift velocity corresponding to this value of the field. Next, we apply a new value, a higher value of the electric field. In this case, in the example I show, it's 200 volt per centimeter. And then we repeat the procedure. So we time step our real-time Boltzmann transport equation until a new steady state is reached. But now we take the previous steady state as the new initial condition. So you can see it here. So our pink curve corresponding to the old steady state now is the initial condition, and we time step it until a new steady state is reached in red here. So for the carrier drift velocity behavior, you can see a new stair in this plot, and then we reach again a new drift velocity corresponding to this field. Then we repeat this procedure until we reach the largest field that we wanted in our velocity field curve. And this animation shows you the entire procedure. So on the left-hand side, you can see the time-dependent occupation. In the center plot, you see the transient velocity. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the drift velocity as a function of electric field, so our velocity field curve. And also for the simulation time, you can see that we needed to time step it until 60 picoseconds. So that's the total time from the beginning till the end. Okay, so now let me talk a bit about the physical results that we can, so about the physics that we can probe with such methods. So, and let me start first with silicon. So first, let us discuss the drift velocity behavior. So on y-axis, you see the drift velocity, and on x-axis is the electric field. So then the symbols correspond to the to experimental points corresponding to 111 direction of the electric field and 100. And lines are our initial results with the 0 adjustable parameters. So we can see, first of all, a very good agreement between experiment and theory. And second, we can also reproduce this the so-called electric field anisotropy effect in silicon. So we can see that when we apply the field in 100 direction, we get a smaller drift velocity than in the 111. And why do we get that? We can actually understand it from the microscopical picture. So we can see actually what are our electron occupations, where do our electrons go, etc. So on the right-hand side, I present the Brillouin zone in the silicon, and at the ground state, the electrons occupy the 6x valleys. You can see them here. So then when you apply the electric field in the 111 direction, due to the crystal symmetry, all of these valleys will be equally excited. However, if you apply your field in the 100 direction, you can see just from the geometrical reasons here, because of this ellipsoidal shape of the valley, that we will get 2 so-called cold valleys and 4 hot valleys. So the hot valleys will be more depleted, and the cold valleys will be more occupied. So because of this effect, we get this electric field anisotropy that we can reproduce using the Perturbo-code. So next system is a bit more interesting. This is the gallium arsenide, also at high fields. So when we see the drift velocity as a function of electric field, we can see that similarly to the previous case, when you apply small field values, your drift velocity increases linearly. However, at some point, you reach a saturation, and even more, you will have a decrease in the drift velocity. It means that, so going from here to here, I apply a larger electric field. However, my response, so my drift velocity becomes smaller. So why is it so? In order to answer to this question, again, we can consider the microscopical nature of the system. So when we apply larger electric fields, the electrons scatter from the gamma valley to the side valleys, which are L and X valleys. So you can see that electrons start here at the gamma valley, which is a big black dot here. Then at a larger field, they scatter to the side valleys, sub L valley, and again at even larger fields, they scatter to the X valley. So you can see that when the electrons scatter to the L valley, we already have some decrease of the drift velocity. This is because the electron mobility in these side valleys is smaller than the electron mobility at gamma valley. That's why when we populate these higher energy valleys, our average overall velocity decays. This is known as the gun effect, and you will learn more how to reproduce it using the Perturbo-code tomorrow at the hands-on session. So everyone is welcome. Okay, so I think I might skip the case of graphene. Mentioning just one point here is that in graphene, the drift velocity is very sensitive to the carrier concentration, so we can reproduce that well. And just one point I wanted to emphasize here is that we are able to split the acoustical and optical phonon contributions. So, for example, here your black curve is the all phonon curve, where we trace the drift velocity as a function of electric field, and all of the electric phonon modes are involved. However, in order to understand what are the major contributions, what are the leading contributions, we can actually turn off the acoustical contributions and see what is going to happen. So first, we can see that at small fields, the curve is different. So we can see that probably the acoustical phonon are important here, because if you remove them, well, the drift velocity is different, right? However, when we reach the saturation, we can see here that the drift velocity with the all phonon modes and the optical modes only are almost the same, meaning that the electron optical modes at high fields are the leading contribution. So you can see this dashed line corresponds to the optical modes only, while the solid line corresponds to the all phonon. Okay, so in this slide, I just wanted to emphasize what are the features of the code and what are especially the new features of Perturbo for those who use it already. So running the ultrafast dynamics within Perturbo, you can have a lot of flexibility with the initial state, and you can reproduce different electron dynamics. So let me explain it better. So you can initialize your system with a Fermi-Dirac distribution, for example. So you'll fix your initial state. Then you can time step your Boson transport equation for some number of steps, maybe until you would reach some steady state. Then with Perturbo, you will get the HDF5 file, which you can read with Perturbo-py, for example. You can read it with other scripts if you like, and then you can use the next step as a restart. So, for example, you can modify somehow your occupation function that maybe you need to fit it to some experimental value or so, and you can restart the calculation and run it again. And then the results of this calculation will be again written to the same HDF5 file as a continuation of your dynamics. So that gives you a toolbox for many different possible initial state and different possible dynamic scenarios. Second, as I was mentioning during the parallelization discussion, that you can first compute these electron phonon matrix elements on very dense grids, but then since this step is very computationally demanding, you can load these elements later for your next time steps, or even after the restart. So first you would need to set the load scatter parameter to false, and then set it to true to read this element. Just one important thing here is that you have to run it on the same number of MPI tasks. Otherwise, the number of the HDF5 file generated for these elements will not correspond to your case. So you have to run the calculation with the same number of MPI tasks. And then the new feature was partially presented in the previous slide, is that you can exclude some of the selected phonon modes in the RT-BTE equation. So, for example, if you would like to perform the calculation with the optical phonons only, so we can set to 0 all of the electron phonon matrix elements that would correspond to the phonon modes from 1 to 4. To do so, you can just introduce this parameter, so phonon mode exclude ranges running 1 to 4. Similarly, you can allow only the electron acoustic phonon interactions by setting the phonon mode exclude ranges 5 and 6. So you would set that elements to 0 as well. Another new feature is that you can stop the ultrafast dynamics when the drift velocity is converged. So you don't have to guess how many steps I need actually to time step my equation until I reach that steady state that I was talking about before. So you can set the Boltzmann acceleration threshold, which is in the units of the acceleration, but which basically means that we want to stop the calculation once we reach our steady state for the new field value. Okay, so in conclusion, so Perturbo provides the framework to perform the ab initio real-time ultrafast dynamics, including the electron phonon scatterings for now. Perturbo performs efficient hybrid MPI and OpenMP parallelization. Running the ultrafast dynamics calculations is flexible, so one can have different types of excitation. So I was showing the Gaussian excitation in silicon. Similarly, you can have the Lorentzian excitation, Fermi-Dirac, and using this flexible framework, when you can write down your occupations, read them with Python, you can basically restart your calculation with anything you want. You can select the energy window and bands, which will significantly reduce your computational cost. You can perform the simulations for electrons and holes. Well, the HDF5 files are very easy to manipulate. They're not machine dependent. You can perform your calculations on a cluster, then copy your HDF5 file to your local computer, do some Python post-processing, then copy it back and run the simulation again. And then since 2.0, we provide the high field dynamics, which I was showing in the previous slide. So with this efficient parallelization, we are able to reach long time scales, even for realistic systems with very dense electron and phonon grids. So as for future releases, I wanted to present this diagram of different time scales. So in today's lecture, we consider the electron phonon interactions, which require the time step of 1 femtosecond. Then, as I was mentioning, we are also working on to include the phonon-phonon interactions. So for these ones, the typical time scale of the evolution of the phonon occupation will be in the order of picosecond. And then if you take back the contribution that I was talking about in the beginning of the talk, the electron-electron contribution, you have to consider the attosecond time scale. So ultimately, we are going to release all of this feature at some point, and now we are approaching to release the phonon-phonon interactions in one of the future releases, and then we are going to include other scattering processes such as exciton dynamics and electron-electron interactions. Also, on the computational side, we are working on the GPU parallelization of the dynamics using the OpenSSD technology. So with this, I thank you for your attention, and I will be happy to take any questions.